Talk about co-working, the good, the bad, and the future. This is my email, eli@startuplink.com. If you have any questions, we can also tweet at us at NotSeriousEli on Twitter. And I'll just say before that, to start a little bit on the lifestyle side of it, that I'm a digital nomad. I've been actually living a lifestyle, and that's why co-working, by the way, is so critical for me. I've been traveling for the last 9 years, I think, since 2010. And the idea is that I'm switching locations every 2 months. I'm going to a new place. I traveled in more than 60 countries and lived in more than 40 countries. By living, I mean I stayed more than 1 month. Co-working for me is critical. Like, I don't think I could have sustained this lifestyle without having a co-working space in each city where I go, because I absolutely don't like working from home. I have a thing that I kind of feel unemployed every time I work from home. So co-working is a super critical thing for me, which allowed me to actually live this lifestyle of constantly changing locations. I'll just say that if you're interested to learn more about the topic of digital nomadism and traveling while working, you can check. I have a blog and podcast at Become Nomad. Over here, you can see it in blue, becomenomad.com, because that's not really the topic of the talk today. So good. Now let's talk a little bit about business. After we talked about vlogging and podcasting, basically what we have is a global startup ecosystem app at StartupBlink.com. We have tens of thousands of startups that are registered, thousands of co-working spaces, accelerators, and so on and so on. Lots of press for the project, so it's a very interesting project that we really enjoy working on. We also have more than 90 communities via Meetup. With about 45,000 entrepreneurs. Probably a lot of you arrived via the meetup groups as well, so that's great to have a community aspect. I'll just let you know that we also have a research branch, and in this research branch, what we do is that we rank about 1,000 cities and about 125 countries around the world according to their startup ecosystem strength. So that's kind of like one of our major functionalities. I'm going to send you in the chat a link to StartupBlink where you can actually see the ranking tables. If you're interested to see where your city or country are located, you can see it below the map. I'll just say a few words about locations, because locations are very, very important. A lot of us are freelancing, are building a startup and doing a lot of things independently. And it's always important to remember that you're not only dependent on your activities, but also on the potential of the location where you are, because where you are actually provides you with the networking opportunities, with the clients, with the really relevant people that can get your startup to the next level, or even become your clients as a freelancer. So that's exactly what our research is doing. It's kind of showing you as an entrepreneur or as a freelancer if you're in the right place, because it's always better to be in a hub, in a place that has a lot of activity, than a kind of a sleepy place that doesn't have a lot of activity. So we always recommend people to kind of figure out, are they in the right location? Now, a right location, by the way, has to do a lot with co-working. Some places actually don't have co-working spaces, and that's a really, really good indication that the place or the city or the town are not that developed yet on a startup level. So if you don't have a selection of co-working spaces in your town or city, it's a really good sign that you might not be in the right place. So just as a side note. So would love it if you can go to the site later on and kind of check where you're located and see if you've made the best decision on the place where you are. Now that we did a quick introduction about myself and the projects, we're gonna talk a little bit about the co-working concept. Then we're gonna speak about the advantages and the disadvantages of doing co-working. Speak a little bit about trends of co-working, and also if you have any questions, you can actually ask now. I'm gonna keep my eye on the QA button, so just in case someone has any question, you can feel free to send them. A little bit of introduction about what is co-working. The idea over here is that those are basically offices or spaces where you go and you can work and kind of rent either a small desk as part of a big desk or a small office and so on. So there are many, many options of what you can do. And they call it hot desk or fixed desk. Usually the hot desk are places where you keep on changing locations every day depending on the availability. And the fixed desk are more like have your own place where you put your things and you can keep them. It's a bit more expensive than the hot desk. Usually startups are also interested in actually renting offices, small offices in the co-working space. An office allows you to kind of build a culture for your startup as well. So the idea is to kind of have a closed space if you're about 3 or 4 people where you can work together while also doing mingling while you're on breaks and so on. So there are many, many setups and many, let's say, options for how you can, what you can exactly purchase in a co-working space. Co-working spaces are also giving you event space. If you have an event to do, a lot of co-working space will be happy to host your event, conference rooms, and so on and so on. Of course, they have also free coffee, so you can always use the coffee in the co-working space. And just statistically, up to this day, there are about 14,000 co-working spaces around the world. That's exponential growth. It's really growing really, really fast. When the first co-working space I attended was in 2012, I've been in co-working spaces in more than 40 countries since then. There were not that many co-working spaces in 2012. I think there were a lot less than 500, so or maybe 1,000. Now it's 14,000. It's only showing you how much it's growing. So it's a trend that is here to continue. And let's talk a little bit about why is it here to continue. So co-working is definitely here to stay. The reasons are as following. A lot of us are now starting to work more and more of the society is starting to work remotely. So the connection, the holy connection between a worker and an office is no longer that holy. In many, many cases, people are working either from home or remotely or for companies in other cities or other countries. And this is a trend that is only expected to continue because more and more things can be done remotely. You don't actually need to be physically in the place to get things done. Now, there is also the growth of startup ecosystems. With time, there are more and more startups around the world, and that's really great to see. And startups are usually working remotely, and when they set up a small team of 2 co-founders, 3 co-founders, they need a space, and that's exactly what co-working spaces are giving them. There is also a trend about what I'm doing, digital nomadism. More and more people are traveling while working, which is great to see. And those people, like me, always require a co-working space. Expats, co-working spaces are super, super popular with expats as well. The reason is that expats need also a place to work, because they're new in the city or the country. And in addition to that, they have a social need to connect with people. Imagine that you're just relocating to a new place, you don't know anyone. So co-working spaces are the first place where you can actually meet people, which is great. One more reason why co-working spaces are here to stay is that they cut costs. Also for companies and corporates. So a lot of companies and corporates don't want to operate their own office, and they actually prefer to have a professional co-working space to give them all those services and basically just focus on the work. One more reason why co-working is here to stay is urban loneliness. So the idea is, I don't know if you know the stats, but basically the human society has never been lonelier than it is now, although we're all scattered in very, very big cities. And the idea is that as an adult, it's relatively difficult to know new people. So a lot of our friends, if you're going to look at it, are from our childhood and also from our work, from the office. So the idea is that once you're out of the office setting, there are very, very limited opportunities to get to know new people. And the co-working spaces are there exactly for that. You can actually build a social network in the co-working space. And of course, free coffee, it's a great invention. So those are the reasons of why we think that the co-working trend will only grow and become bigger. Now, let's talk a little bit about the advantages of co-working, because there are many, many advantages to doing co-working. And again, if you have any questions or any comments, you can feel free to ask. And let's talk a little bit about the advantages. The first advantages is the important separation between home and work, which is critical. People do not understand in many, many cases that working at home is problematic, not only on efficiency, because our biggest temptations are at home. We have the refrigerator, the TV, and so on and so on. We can go back to sleep or whatever. Also, the idea is that for some reason we're less efficient working from home. So if you separate the place where you actually get the work done from home, it will give you a lot of benefits on efficiency. You're just going to work better, and you're probably going to be happier as well. So it makes a lot of sense to do the separation. We talked about the increased efficiency. So the idea is that if it has a cost, because co-working are not for free, you have to pay, but it increases your work volume, then probably it's worthwhile. Business infrastructure, co-working spaces are giving you printers, they're giving you fast internet, they're giving you all the infrastructure you need so you can focus on what matters, which is basically doing the work. Other than that, co-working spaces are basically solving a lot of the problem of isolation and happiness, because you get to work with like-minded independent people. Just want to say that for freelancers and for startup founders, one of the biggest problems reported by our segment of the population, the people who are kind of want to break free from the 9 to 5, is the loneliness element. There is so much uncertainty. If you're doing it alone, it can really be a drag. So the idea is that the co-working space kind of allows you to see people around you that are doing exactly the same thing, trying to build something totally new, trying to become independent in some way or another. So this is really important, and it's very helpful emotionally to be surrounded by like-minded people. Because if not, it's only you and working on a new thing that is totally uncertain. Emotionally, it's probably not a good place to be in. Co-working spaces are also giving you a lot of networking opportunities. I have a lot of clients, a lot of suppliers, team members that I actually met in the co-working spaces. So there is a great benefit in actually like doing co-working. It's more in the longer term, but you're going to meet a lot of influential people that are going to make an impact on your business in co-working spaces. If you're sociable and friendly enough, which is important, but the idea is that the networking opportunities are ample in co-working spaces, and it makes sense to take this into account as well. Co-working spaces have a lot of brainstorming opportunities with experts in their field. It's very likely that if you're doing co-working, you're going to meet a Facebook ads expert, a Google ads expert, someone that is doing programming on Python or on JavaScript or whatever. So it's really nice to be in a situation that if you have a question about blockchain or whatever, there's always someone there that kind of knows their stuff, and you're also going to be able to help other people. Co-working spaces also have a lot of cool events that you can learn a lot from, so it makes a lot of sense to attend. So that's for the knowledge base. Also, social life, we talked about that. That's the place where you're going to meet your new friends if you're going on an independent path. It's not going to happen if you're going to stay at home. Coffee shops can get very frustrating. A lot of people are working in coffee shops, but coffee shops tend to be a little bit hectic, not so stable internet, a lot of noise. People are expecting you to leave when it gets full, and so on and so on. Libraries are kind of the same, with the limitation of not being able to speak. So the idea is that after some time, even if you try to find solutions outside of your home, co-working spaces are probably the best solution there is in general. And co-working spaces also allow you to rent short-term. So the idea is that you don't really need to commit for 1 year, like in a regular office. Everything is either weekly or monthly, which is very much into the mindset of startups. We never know if we're going to be here in 6 months, so why commit for a yearly contract? It makes a lot more sense to work on a monthly basis. So that's something that co-working spaces allow you to have a lot more flexibility. So a lot of advantages. I'm pretty sure that I see most of you are thinking about joining a space. So you have a nice list here of advantages of co-working. But there are a few disadvantages. I have to admit, not everything is totally perfect. So the first disadvantage is that basically co-working costs money. Um, Depends where you are, depends exactly what is the package that you're going to buy. Usually it's starting at around $200 a month to about $400 a month or 500. So it can be a relatively high expense that increases your cost of life. You have to take this into account. It's an item that's going to increase your monthly expenditure. Like we talked before, it's very likely to also increase your revenue. So it makes sense. It's kind of an investment in a way, but you pay a price for it. Other disadvantages is that there are transportation costs. You have to pay for a train or for a bus, or you lose time while you walk there or get there, and so on and so on. So you lose a little bit of time. There is a little bit of a sacrifice element over here of not staying at home. Now, I do want to say that for some people, co-working is not really a good option. You have a few very introvert people, usually people who are doing coding that need complete silence and total control of their environment. And in this case, they might prefer to stay at home. So for some people, co-working is not a solution, or might be a solution only for one day of the week, just to break the routine a little bit. But for most people, I think it's much better to work in a co-working space than staying at home. Co-working spaces can get very noisy. There's a lot of background noise always, and it's something that you can't really control. So that's kind of part of being in a co-working environment. There are some special places in co-working spaces usually that are quiet zones, so you can kind of control it. In the end of the day, you have to remember you're still gonna work a lot alone on your project. So nobody in the co-working space usually is there. It's not a communist model of people working on the same things. In the end of the day, it's you in front of your laptop, but surrounded by a lot of people doing the same thing, which is absolutely great. So those are a few disadvantages, let's say, of co-working. I honestly think that a lot of those disadvantages are actually advantages, because if it costs money and it takes time to get there, you give a little bit more value to your work, because you're actually saying, hey, my time is now worth a lot more than before. You take yourself more seriously. So in a way, a lot of those disadvantages are can be switched into with a mindset switch to advantages. So let's talk a little bit about how to find the right co-working space for you. So the first thing I have to say about finding the right co-working space is that you have to go there. You have to kind of experiment, and the idea is trial and error. The thing is that one of the most important things that you want to feel is being comfortable in a place and happy in a place. And you will never know if it's going to be the case before you visit it. So the first advice I give is try to visit all the co-working space in your city. Try to book. Usually most of them have a 1-day free tour, so that you can stay and work as a trial for 1 day without paying. I totally recommend doing that and kind of experimenting with a few of them so you can pick the best place for you. Makes a lot of sense. If you're going to be there for a year or two, why not do a little bit of shopping, just like everything else, and pick the best option for you. So it makes sense. I do want to say that co-working spaces do diversify on their theme. So for example, you have co-working spaces that are very much into the startup scene, all about entrepreneurs trying to change the world, and so on and so on. You have other co-working spaces that are more into freelancing, professional people that are giving services to people. So you have co-working spaces that have very strong communities. It's almost like some kind of a modern community in a way, working together and so on. There are co-working spaces that are specific niche, especially in big cities, like designer co-working spaces, co-working spaces for women only, and so on and so on. So there is a very wide variety, and the idea is to kind of find a place that aligns with your profile in a way. If there is a selection. In some cities, there is no selection. You're probably going to have only 2 options or 3 options. And so, as we said, the best way to do that is just go to Google Maps, or to other sites like StartupBlink or even coworker.com. Coworker.com is great for finding spaces, or Google Maps. Just type co-working. It's going to show you all the options, and just jump for a day and do a trial day in those places. They allow, most of them, the vast majority allow a trial day. I do recommend to choose a co-working space that is easy for you to get to. So you also have to think about what's happening in winter, or what's happening if you're in a low energy day. If you're in a place that is really hard to get to from your home, you're probably not going to use it that much. So also find the place that is convenient to get to. So those are a few tips and tricks about how to find a co-working space that is good for you. Let's talk a little bit about the latest trends of the co-working world. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them on the QA. So first of all, I think that the growth of co-working will be a little bit more linear now. It was exponential. It was crazy growth until in the last few years to be in a situation that we have 14,000 locations. From now on, it's probably going to be a little bit linear and hopefully not decreasing. There is another trend of having big chains of co-working that are basically opening more and more branches all over the world. Someone can guess who is the biggest co-working chain currently in the world in the chat. Let's see if you're updated. I'll look for the first person that, yes, so Nikki, you're definitely right. It's WeWork. I'm actually co-working now in WeWork in Haifa in Israel. It's my first time co-working in WeWork, so it's pretty exciting. WeWork is, so the idea about the big chains, just as a quick introduction, WeWork, for example, they have about 300 co-working spaces around the world in 70 cities. It's pretty interesting because what they're doing is that they give you the same experience, more or less, in many, many locations. In a way, it's kind of like McDonald's, in a way that you don't have surprises. It's very likely that the co-working space in Haifa would be the same like co-working space in New York and so on. So the idea is that it has a few advantages, and there are more and more networks like that that are opening in many, many locations under the same brand. Pretty interesting. I love to mix them. Sometimes I like to go to the chain, sometimes I like to go to the more community-oriented. So it's always interesting to see how much diversity there is. I think that more trends is going to be, we're going to see a lot more co-working spaces in smaller locations and towns. So about 5 years ago, you would have co-working spaces only on major giant cities. And now this is slowly becoming very much, co-working is spreading also to smaller cities that have about 100,000 people or 200,000 people. So it's great to see that you have some even co-working resorts in small villages and so on and so on. So it's great to see that you no longer have to be stuck in a capital city if you want to do co-working. They're really spreading, and I'm hoping this will continue. One more trend that is pretty interesting is co-living. People are now actually living in their co-working spaces in some cases. So some co-working spaces are actually giving you an option in the same building to rent a space where you can live in addition to a place where you can work. So that's a pretty interesting, let's say, trend. We have a question from Joanna about which co-working spaces would you recommend for freelancers around the world? Great question. Again, I think that you can't go wrong with WeWork. That's one option. But what I would do, because it's very personal and co-working spaces are still different, they're not like McDonald's. Nobody can replicate the same experience. I would test. So the idea is just to figure out which ones are right for you and just do a quick test and figure out which one is the best. So yeah, freelancers, a lot of them, by the way, are located in Regus. So Regus has, it's a big co-working chain as well, and they have something called Spaces now. And actually, I noticed that lawyers, accountants, and so on are preferring a little bit more to go to Spaces by Regus, while startup entrepreneurs, investors, and so on, kind of high flyers in a way, are more geared towards WeWork. So that's kind of like a little bit of a distinction. Deborah is asking about the weaknesses of a larger co-working companies that smaller companies can take advantage of. I think there are some. So the idea is that, like we said, you can't really replicate a process. So even if WeWork wants to do exactly the same space in Tel Aviv like they have in New York, they might not be able to. And I do think that it makes a lot of sense to have a founder. The small co-working spaces actually have a founder that cares about the space. So if you're just hiring employees to run a branch, it might not be as powerful as someone that is there 24/7 and that's their business. It's kind of like their baby. So in a way, I do think that the smaller co-working spaces that have only one space have an advantage on the level of care, of how much they care about the space and how much they can actually create a genuine community in a way. So um, I definitely don't think that co-working spaces are the co-working industry is going to be a one winner market, just like Facebook or Google. There is a place for everyone, if you ask me. So that's relatively good news for the smaller spaces. Okay, let's see what other things are on the list. Co-living, we talked about. That's pretty interesting. Living in the place where you work at. I honestly, I prefer not to do that. I actually prefer to, let's say, separate work from home. But some people really find it comfortable to be in the same building, working there, and also living there. One more trend that is interesting for co-working is that a lot of them are becoming one-stop shop for other life-related services. A lot of them are now offering nurseries. They're going to give you a place where you can bring your pets during the day. Yoga, doing yoga. A lot of them are going to give you accountant services included and so on and so on. So the idea is that a lot of co-working spaces are kind of covering a wide variety of services that they're not just a place where you put the laptop and work, but they also give you kind of like a more comprehensive solution of sorts. So that's pretty interesting. And let's go over to the next advantage. So basically, the next trend. So I actually identify a trend that I don't know if it's positive or not, of corporates that are starting to use co-working spaces more and more. Companies like Microsoft and so on, they start to send their employees to co-working spaces because they're kind of saving on let's say office space as well. So I think that in the future we're going to see a lot more corporates sending their employees to work in co-working spaces. And that's going to be very, very interesting because you will have the option of connecting with a lot of resources just by having coffee in the co-working space, and you can meet people in Microsoft or Intel and so on. So that's pretty interesting. And one more trend that is relatively interesting is the digital nomadism trend of combined with co-working. You have some programs like Remote Here that basically have 1 year of co-working that you join. You pay them a lot more than what you would pay if you would do it on your own. That's why I never do that. But the idea is that they take you 1 month after the other to new locations. So 1 month you're in Lisbon, in Portugal, then you go 1 month to India, then you go 1 month to the States, and you go 1 month to Medellin, Colombia. So the idea is that you're moving together as a group and doing co-working in each location. I wouldn't do it, but it's becoming more and more popular with many, many programs like that. And people kind of are afraid to do the first step and traveling on their own. So that's a really nice and interesting solution. And there is also now a beginning of some kind of a private co-working chains that people are doing in their homes. So there might be a situation that people are going to rent part of their home as a co-working space during the day, just like Airbnb in a way, but for offices. So that's another really exciting trend that can happen. And our friends actually in coworker.com are doing exactly that. They have a new a project called Hotspots that is relevant for people that want to start a co-working space in their home. So I'm going to share a link over here in the chat to anyone who is interested to kind of go on an initiative like that. Should be interesting. It's like a beta phase for them. It's really interesting to see if it's going to work. So we're cheering for them. And let's go over a little bit. This is the last slide on valuable resources that we recommend. So to find co-working spaces, the biggest co-working directory currently in the world is coworker.com. So I'm going to send it to you quickly in the chat. They have about more than 10,000 spaces. So they cover about 70% of the spaces around the world. We have a discount for our members from WeWork, where I'm doing co-working now. They're offering StartupBlink members free tour, first of all, so you can kind of check the place, and up to 15% discount. So I'm going to share it with you in the chat as well, so you can book a free tour. What do you have to lose? Free tour is always good. And check a WeWork location. It's always interesting to see the phenomenon. However, I'm going to say it again, try to see a few locations in each city, not necessarily of the same company, but a few places, just to make sure that you make the best selection when you actually go for a co-working space. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We covered a lot of things. So I'm hoping I gave you a little bit of an initial taste for the co-working world. And if you have any questions, let me know in the chat. I'll be happy to answer. And I'm sharing again a link to our Telegram. Just a minute. So this is a link to our Telegram groups where you can join. There are about 500 entrepreneurs there. We would love it if you can join us in the chat. And yeah, that's basically the advice. The best advice I can give you is just try co-working. It might be a thing that can really change your life, and socially and also efficiently on working better on your project. So it was a pleasure to have you here. Hopefully, I convinced a few of you to start co-working. And stay tuned. We're going to have more webinars. We're always doing about one webinar a month or even more on several topics. So it's always great to have a lot of participants. And thanks, enjoy. And I'm going to keep the chat open for a few minutes. If you have any questions, feel free, connect with other people, and we'll be in touch. So thank you. Bye-bye.